Thank you so much for joining us for the November challenge. Something we've been thinking a lot about as we are almost at the end of October. Sherry, can you believe it?
No, I can't.
It has been a long couple of months.
And yet November snuck up on us.
That is absolutely right. So I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck. I'm joined today by Dr. Sherry Woosley, who is going to help us think through the next couple of months. We're really thinking forward through Thanksgiving and then into December and January and February and trying to get ahead of that train. And the reason we decided to do this webinar is because you and I were talking about this and we started to mention it to our clients who were like, oh my goodness, this is coming, right?
Yes. And I even mentioned it on just phone calls with people kind of going, is anybody thinking about November? And as soon as I did, people kind of went, oh, I hadn't, that was October. It felt so far away. And it's not.
Prepare, right? Yeah, plenty of time to prepare. So we are going to today, we're going to define the challenges that you are going to be facing in this November challenge. And then we want to talk about how to move students through our student success funnel. How do you find them? How do you connect with them and solve problems? How are you going to measure? And I want to have a spoiler alert, which is the outcome of this time that we spend together, I think is going to be very encouraging. So Sherry, as you and I have walked through what happened since March and looked at the data and tried to figure out kind of what are the implications of that, I finished this kind of mind exercise of what's going to happen in November, really feeling encouraged, like there's a lot that we can do that's going to be really positive. So that's the light at the end of the tunnel that I want us all to keep our eyes on. Remember, you guys, we are recording this. We will send recordings to you. So if there are people on your campus that you think would benefit from hearing this, we will send that to you. And then, as always, we're happy to be interrupted with questions. If you are doing something genius on your campus, I would love to hear about it. So please chat that to us. And then any other information that you feel like would be helpful to share with us, we're really happy to hear that. So, okay, so can we define, let's just start with the November challenge. I've tried to lay this out in terms of, first of all, let's think about our student population that we're sending home for Thanksgiving. They have not had a typical college experience, whether they're freshmen or sophomores or juniors or seniors. And all of those different classifications have had really different experiences based on what happened in March, how you got connected to them over the summer, and then what happened this fall. I think we were saying no matter what you did this fall, whether you were totally online or you had students on your campus, it was not a typical college experience. It was masks and single rooms and not eating in the cafeteria and social distancing and all of that stuff that keeps our students safe, but also makes it hard for us to connect with each other. And one of the hardships I think about the November challenge is that when you were talking about freshmen and sophomores coming back for this fall, they were really excited. They were looking forward to it. And it was an idealized version of coming back to school or going to college for the first time. They're not confused anymore what it looks like to be on campus. So you don't have them where they're going to say like, oh, and it will be so fun because we'll have athletics and we'll do this. They know what they're coming back to. And in a lot of ways, that's really, really difficult. So that's the challenge. You have disillusioned students who haven't had an ideal experience. And now we're going to send them home for Thanksgiving. And I'm looking at our poll. So I'm really curious, you guys, there's a lot of different things that people are doing for this. It looks like right now 50% of you are going home and then going to move to online classes. 44% did accelerated classes, so the semester is going to end in November. And then a very small percent of you will go back home and then come back to campus after. So One thing that I wanted to say about that is that students who go home and stay home and do online classes, that is most similar to their experience in March through May of last year, right? Where we sent them home and they were doing all of their online classes. Those of you who have done accelerated classes so that your semester ends, that is most similar to like a summer break, basically, because we're talking about a 3-month break, depending on what you're going to do. The other poll that I would really like to see, you guys, is what you were going to do in the spring. So I think we have schools that are just doing what they normally do. We have schools that are pushing their start date back into January, some schools all the way to February. So I'm really curious to see what that looks like here. Let's just take a minute so that I can. So
maybe it's folks' best guess, because I've heard some schools haven't decided.
Yes, that is a really good point. And as we know with what happens even for the fall, right? Up until you start school, you have no idea what that plan is. Okay, so it looks like 38% have either a normal start date, so they're gonna maybe send them home and then they'll come back normally, and then very similar delayed start to the end of January. 3 of you are delaying to the beginning of February, and then several people have already said, hey, we're not gonna come back in the spring. I think California, a lot of California schools have just said, we're not gonna come back in the spring, we're gonna be online. So depending on what that reality is for you, those all of those variables are going to make an impact on your students, and we're trying to get ahead of that so that we can make some good decisions. And what I really like is that we do have now some understanding, some context of kind of the experience of sending these students home, like I said, either doing it online or not. So the elements of the November challenge are, first of all, community separation. We dealt with this last spring, right? How do we develop community with our students? Home insecurities. We got a lot of information about what's going on in students' homes with food and with internet and with space and just all of that stuff. That's going to be a really big part of the November challenge. Talking about engaged learning. So if you're moving to online, how do we continue to keep our students engaged when, let's just be frank, everyone is tired of learning online. And then the third piece of that November challenge is that we actually have, in some cases, depending on those variables, you may have a 3-month break. So it's the equivalent of sending students home for Thanksgiving and then basically giving them that summer timeline. And then when you bring them back the next, right? Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to face the November challenge. And Sherry, I love this model for student success. Yeah. And I think it's going to be really fun to look at how schools use this over the last 2 semesters to really make a difference. So we want to start with identify, and then we'll talk a little bit about connecting and solving. I do want to say it is really important that we do this as quickly as possible, because we don't want students to get laden with this debt that is really hard to recover from. So thinking through how are we going to identify students really quickly so that we can put in the right interventions in place really to help them recover. And the first thing that you and I have been talking about is anticipating students' needs. And I love what you said here, which is you should ask them.
Yeah, and some of these things we're not going to know any other way than asking them. You're not going to know about their sense of belonging unless you ask them. Yeah. You're not going to know if they're concerned about finances, if they're thinking about not coming back, if they're, if this whole situation has made them more homesick, less motivated, less engaged. You might see some behaviors, but even those behaviors may not create outcomes or visible things until later. So to your point of success debt, sometimes the fastest, most efficient way is just ask them. And I wanted to talk some about this survey approach, because that is a fast way to ask a lot of students in a short amount of time. We've been doing survey work for a long, long time about student retention. 30 years total is some of the stuff, 20 years for me. not quite that old yet, but 150 institutions, 1 million college students over the past. And yes, this is a different situation than we've seen before. The November problem is not one we've really had to address in the ways that we are, but there are definitely things we can build on this past to be thinking about as we're trying to identify students that may have issues this fall. We've been thinking a lot about it, and we spent a lot of time over the summer thinking about how to approach fall. And that was back when fall looked like chaos and we didn't know what was going to start when or how or what. And so this was the kind of plan that we put together for fall of, checking in with students before they come, checking in about week 3, checking in about week 8, finding out why students didn't come back, and then checking in at the end of the term. And we've now been thinking about this November problem. And we're phrasing it that way because it is new this year. We haven't had a situation where we send students home and they don't come back until 6-7 weeks later on some campuses, if they come back at all, given that they may stay online. So what we were thinking about as we looked at this set of surveys that are already kind of up and running and address COVID issues and address a wide variety of issues, there's 2 ways you could address the November problem. One is take that check-in survey, either move it from the 8th week till later, or do it again. There's no harm in checking back in with students because maybe around midterms they were okay, but you're getting ready to send them home for Thanksgiving and they're not okay. The other alternative is the term outcome survey. Okay, so they finish up with, Thanksgiving and they head home. They have 1 week of courses and finals. Let's find out how that semester really went, what they're thinking about that semester, what they're feeling about that semester, and start laying some groundwork for processing that and heading into the next semester. So either of those 2 would be really great ways to do a fast check-in to identify, as you said. So.
And there's a term in counseling about where you never kind of relapse or go back to the same place, you recycle, which I was thinking about sending out a survey. If you did one before, sending out a survey again, because we're not any of us in the same place we were last time someone asked us, right? So you think about just we're further into this, things have changed. Maybe it was okay, when I thought it was going to be short term for me to be at home, but now we're just, so the constantly going back and saying things are different now, we need to go back and ask again because it is going to be a different response. I do not feel the same way that I did in March, right?
Yeah. We're also working on a survey for spring for the students who end up on academic probation or who are in that situation so that we can check in with them with some specific questions for them. And that may be one that we can offer in December or January, depending. All of these surveys and this way to play are super simple. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, we can't do another system, we don't want nothing new. This is seriously 5-minute setup. One of the people on the call today is Mandy, our salesperson. She'll wave at the end. She can demo this thing, and nothing is more fun than in basically 3 minutes, her going boom, 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 surveys launched. So it is that simple. It's a URL that you send to students, however they're used to hearing from you. So you don't have to invent a new way to get to them. And then the data, we have some analytic stuff, but we've got great success pulling it into Pharos so that if that's where your users are, that's where your people are, that's where the data is. And Rachel will show you that, or you can pull it into almost anything. So
yeah, that's awesome. And I love the topics that you're addressing too.
Yeah, these are the ones that have historically had such great relationships with retention, and they still do, regardless of the situation we're all in now. How confident is a student about their abilities? How are they feeling about financial means to stay in school? Do they plan to come back? Not many people will say that they're leaving, but huge red flag. But even, missed class, that could be critically important that you want to look at that for online classes. Academic resiliency, midterms came out. How are they feeling about that? And are they going to bounce back if they had some struggles with that? Homesickness, goal setting, all kinds of stuff that matters. And we've got this down now, I would say, to an art. We've given you one homesickness question, but it's from the 15 we tested over the last 20 years. So we know it's the right one.
Great. So I want to come back to this when we talk about connecting and solving, because I think there's a lot of practical implications of this. But the nice thing is that it just, one of the reasons I love being your partner is because these two things really connect pretty seamlessly, so that you are able to find those students quickly without a burden. And then also so that we can get on with the management of that piece, right?
Yep. I think the two systems married together makes both of them more powerful.
Yeah.
So I think that's a piece of it. The other thing that I would say when I'm thinking about surveys and the November problem is you need a holistic scan. You can't just focus on academics. You can't just focus on a small piece of the pie in terms of retention. You want a good sense of how is the whole student doing, and also a holistic scan of as many students as you can hear from, because some of those who are struggling may not rise to visibility, particularly in socially distanced environments.
Absolutely. Sherry, I have a question from our friend Mason. He is asking about the concern that asking a student, what is your intent, or do you intend to come back, would then suggest to them that maybe it's an option for them to not come back. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, we get that question, I would say frequently, but over 20 years, frequently is 10 times. So it is one that is raised. I will tell you in general, it's not a common response among students. So if we were raising it for them, you would see the rates much higher. But of the, 5-10% who say, yeah, I'm thinking of not coming back, depending on the campus, the rate at which they don't come back can be very, very high. So it's not a common flag, it's an important one.
Yeah.
So, and we don't ask, do you intend to leave? We ask, are you intending to come back? And it is a fair question, particularly right now with COVID.
Yeah. I think that's one of those things where if they say it, then we should just believe them, right? Right.
Yes. You want to find out why, so that hopefully you can get to the next thing. I gave you a little bit of a story. This is before COVID. This is fall 2019, but this is University of Missouri. They sent out this kind of a survey to all of their first year students, and then they started doing interventions. And the thing I think that is really lovely about this is it shows you that, of all the students, and I love the sense of belonging one, because that's the one to me that doesn't always rise to the top. But of all the students who said, I'm concerned I don't fit here, they intervened with them. The ones they intervened with had a significantly higher retention rate. And GPAs wise, they already had a higher retention rate. So these are all sense of belonging kinds of issues. So this tells you how important the intervention part of it is when you know what the issue is.
Yeah, it makes me so happy because I am always thinking about actionable data. I always want to know, like, okay, well, thank you for telling me that about that student.
Yeah.
And I will say sometimes I work with schools where they have so much data that it's noisy. They can't tell, like, what are we supposed to do with all of this stuff? The implications of this are, if you can find the information from a survey, you can act on it and you can make a difference on it. And that, as we look at the data, I think is going to be really exciting as we walk through how that intervention. So I would just say, in terms of getting students to complete surveys, I will show you, I think sometimes there's a kind of perspective that they're self-selecting. If they're doing a survey, that they're more engaged. And in some cases that may be true. But I also will show you how doing a survey and getting that intervention really changes the outcome of whether or not they retain. Sherry, can you talk a little bit about how you incentivize students to take this survey? Because I'm thinking one of the reasons we rushed this webinar is because we do have some time on campus where we can, if you're in person, where you can go and find students where they're not kind of in the black hole of going home and being online. So how do you talk to campuses about getting students to take these surveys?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that campuses do. A couple things I would point out, first of all, a 12-question survey that's mobile friendly is a lot easier than the standard 100-question whatever. So that alone, I think it's about how does the message go out to them? Who's the message from? What does the message tell them about what you're going to do with it? Because this is not a survey that goes into the black hole of information. This is a survey that we're going to do something with, that we're going to use to help you. In the resources at the end of the webinar, there's a great example from University of Houston who is using these surveys, who did a video that they sent to students that says, this is why we're asking you to do this. This is what we plan to do with it. And it has a bunch of different housing staff talking about it. That can be one way. One thing you're also going to want to think about is survey incentives and what works in the socially distanced environment. Because it used to be that you could, here's a gift card to the coffee shop. That might not work anymore. I know over the summer, people use some gift packs from the bookstore that could be sent. So think about it, get creative, but don't underestimate the language of the invite and who the invite's from. If it's from somebody they know, makes a difference. You like to talk about connections. Connections matter even for a survey invite, right?
I love that, leveraging those relationships. That's right. Because if they know me and I'm like, hey, can you just fill this out so that we can make sure we get you what you need? That's totally different than a random person asking them to do it. I also was thinking about incentivizing. So if you're doing online classes, maybe there's something that your students need. So my husband's a faculty, and if he did all of his online training, they gave him a microphone for to teach his classes. So maybe there's some incentive drawing something like that you can say, hey, you're going to go home and do online learning. But for sure, we can give you some tools to help you with that.
If there's a first year experience course, if there's any of those, and if those folks know what it is, that helps a ton too.
Yeah, that's right. One other thing I would just say is when we're talking about this issue of this is the beginning of these retention efforts for the challenge of November. And if you think about it like that, if you think about it under enrollment management, it is worth good incentives to get your students to take the survey, because you then don't have to spend the $7,000 or $8,000 to re-recruit a whole new class. So I think if you look at it in terms of an investment to increase your retention, it's easier to kind of make that case. Okay, I want to talk about two other ways that you might be able to find students who are struggling. You can do, those of you who are Pharos 360 clients, you have all of these different connection forms in your system. If you want to go through and ask your REs to do check-ins specifically around what's going on with them, I think that's a great idea. I would also be connecting with financial aid. So financial aid will have some really good insights on students who are struggling, who have come to talk to them about tuition. We know that some schools are doing a tuition reset, but a lot of schools are not, and some schools have increased tuition. So that financial aid piece, I think, will be really important. Also, as we're thinking about the November challenge, I would say, remember the students that you gave CARES Act money to, because that was a long time ago. And so we want to be thinking about how are we going to bridge the gap for those students if they're in the same position, but we're not getting more money to share with them. Okay, so let's move on to connect and solve. And I want to think about how we're engaging our students once we have this information. The first thing that I'm gonna say, and so those of you who know me know that I'm always talking about how important it is to connect before you solve, because people like to spend time with other people. And when you do that, some of these things just get worked out. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but the most important thing for your students is that they feel seen, that they feel important, that they understand they are part of the community, and that you want them to come back. Remember, we're talking about that community disengagement, that they haven't had an ideal experience on your campus. And so we're constantly trying to communicate with them, hey, you're part of us, we want to be connected to you, it's really important. I think one of the things I would say is, I had to do this with my elementary age child, which is we have to come up with some kind of artificial time understanding when we're facing this long stretch of not being together. So by that, I mean, we can say, we're going to send you home on Thanksgiving, and then you're going to come back at the end of January. And that feels like this to me, right? It's just like wide open space of not being together. It's cold and it's bleak, and we'll see you later. I think the right thing to do is to frame it in terms of, I made a list of everything that's going to happen. If you send your students home Thanksgiving and then they come back in January, here's what's going to happen between when you send them home and they come back. So they're going to have Thanksgiving. They're either going to be done with their classes or they're going to do their online classes. They're going to take finals. They're going to have Christmas. They're going to have New Year's. They're maybe going to go back to online classes and then return to school. Those are all very individual things that we can distinguish for them, even though it feels very bleak. If we say, hey, you go home and have Thanksgiving, and that's what you normally would be doing, and it's going to be a week. And then you're going to come back to online classes, but not forever, only for this amount of time. And then now we're in finals, and you may be stressed out about that. Now you have a month of Christmas break. Does that make sense? Like that when you somehow break it up for them and you say during these times, this is a happy time, this is Christmas, we don't have to worry about COVID, you would be home anyway. Somehow it gives them a rhythm that they're more used to instead of just this thing stretching out in front of them. The other thing I would say about that is, I think particularly for people in higher education, we really like the rhythm of the academic year. It's how it makes sense to us. You know, we do this and then we do this, and now it's time for midterms, and now it's time. And we really do measure our time that way. Now we're in registration season, and then we're going to do this thing. And so I think using that language to connect with students will be very helpful to them, to make them feel like there is a rhythm and it's not just this kind of spreading out in front of them. Okay, the other thing, as we're talking about connecting, all of the survey data, so I know many of you have already done surveys for your students in March, so you've experienced this, but I think even moving forward, it's going to be more important. All of the data from these surveys is going to be in Pharos 360. And what's nice about this is that you can get it to the right people. So we display this to touch point connections. We'll help you decide who that is. If that's an advisor or a success coach or a Res Life staff or a faculty member, who is the person that's going to take this data and actually do some of this connection and intervention? I think a lot of times one of the problems you have to solve is, we have all this really actionable data. How do we get it to the people who need it, right? And so pulling it into Pharos 360, I think will be really useful. I also would just say, if you do not have a student management, and I don't mean like we're collecting information about them, but I mean a list of students that you know exactly what's going on with them, where they are, who's connected to them, what their concerns are, what are the things you need to talk about. If you don't have that, this is the time to invest in it, because we don't know what's going to be happening in the coming semesters. And it's incredibly important for you to be keeping track of what's going on with students, both for their student success, but also just for retention, to make sure that we're in the right place. Sorry, I have a question here. How do we support our students through this challenge when they don't want to show up for anything in person or virtually? And now the weather's changing in Michigan, and the spring semester is going to be really, really difficult. Man, that is a very good question. I think at the heart of that, and Sherry, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about it, but I think at the heart of that, it is leveraging relationships. That, again, maybe if a faculty member says, hey, Matt, where were you? They're not going to respond. But if I have a relationship with Matt and he knows me, and I text him and say, hey, what's going on with you? Is everything okay? It's more likely that they would respond to that. But I think everybody is really fatigued. Do you have anything to add to that?
I would say the same. I mean, that's why motivation right now is so problematic. There's been some articles lately come out about we're hitting the 6-month mark, and the 6-month mark is hard in any stressful situation. And the one thing that I've seen in at least the research on the 6-month mark is it does naturally go away. So make sure you're there and ready for it. And know that we're all, I don't know about you, but there are days I don't really want to show up. But if somebody reaches out and says, hey, Cher, what's going on? What about this? That helps a ton.
For sure. I really like that idea that it just goes away, because then we just think of it like a thunderstorm, right? Like it rolls in and we're in the thick of it and it's really difficult, and then it's going to roll out and we're going to find ourselves in a different place. So yeah, I think there's a lot of difficulties with where we are right now. And actually, the next thing that I wanted to talk about was academic probation. So I'd love to hear more about that survey, because you and I haven't talked about that. But I'm just thinking, remember, in this stretch that's coming up, we're going to have either finals because you're done at November, or you're going to go back to online classes and then you're going to have finals, and you're going to be doing that at home, and that's going to be really tricky. And then you are going to get your grades and you maybe put on academic probation. And we all know in a normal academic year, that is a place where we are always talking about, hey, be really careful how you communicate that. Students can feel really overwhelmed. They can feel like they're failing. I will be very interested to see what the grades look like at our institutions this semester, because I don't know how, I mean, obviously students aren't doing their best work. I don't know that they're doing passable work, to be quite honest with you. So that is a place where I think we have to revisit our academic probation, what's that, like rules, whatever that is, like
plans, contracts.
Look, we're gonna have to make some allowance for this, because I think it's gonna be a big problem.
Well, I think that was what we were struggling with writing that survey, was how do we ask the important questions, knowing that many students believe that this is just a reset. They don't need to do anything different. It was just a tough semester. And that's what happens in a normal year. Right. So, how do we ask them about these very behaviors and things that we know that they need to do that they may or may not have internalized yet? And so I think there's two things, and the way that we were thinking about it was that at the end of the semester, you do ask how they did, because how they see how they did could be a really important start to the conversation when you see their grades against how they feel about the semester. And then what we've designed is a recovery survey that would be given at about the 3-week mark in place of the regular survey. It'll have some of the same stuff, but some more academic focus, because that's where we're most concerned about those students right then. So it's slightly different, but some of the parallel things.
Yeah, I was thinking, Sherry, about this idea that sometimes when you predict failure, you actually can recover with your students really well. So I think even languaging about, hey, everybody is feeling anxious about grades because we've not done this before. And so when you get your grades, if they're not what you expected, that's okay. There are going to be a lot of people who are in that place. I think it's part of the November challenge, because you don't want to give them a reason to not want to come back. And I talk all the time about shame. I said I was an at-risk student. I wasn't confused. I felt ashamed of myself. Yeah. I will tell you, if I were in school now and I did not do well in my grades, I would not come back, because I would be ashamed. I'm at home already. I'm just going to stay there, because obviously I'm not being successful and I'm not doing a really good job. So I think kind of predicting that is super important, and then saying that is not a reason to not come back and be with us. This happens, like you said, normally. This may happen to freshmen normally. They can recover from that.
And most students don't realize how common it is.
Right.
They think they're the only one, right?
That is exactly right. I have a question here from Kirk. It says, as the chief academic officer in our athletic department of 600 plus student athletes, I'll tell you our academic probation are going to be twice as high as they normally are. Some students have the greatest struggle with the hybrid model. I think that is exactly right. And that's why I think we've got to revisit what our policies are when it comes to that. Sherry, do you have a question? No? Okay, sorry. I'm getting lots of mixed signals here. Okay, so let's talk about, this is my favorite part. And I want to make sure that I explain this so that everybody can understand what they're looking at, because there's a lot of information on the screen. So I'm gonna actually make my cursor so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, so we are looking at data that we've collected since March. These are students. First of all, at this institution up here, you can see the overall retention rate is 77.47%. So that's kind of our average rate that we're looking at. Here, you can see we have a list of first generation students, a group of students that have a high school GPA below 3.23, students who have a Pell Grant, and FTF 0 students, which are students that did not come, freshman students that did not come with any hours. They didn't take AP classes, they didn't take dual credit, they have 0 credit hours. At this institution, these 4 things, first generation, high school below GPA, Pell Grant, and FTF 0, were the most at-risk groups of students that we see. So when we do predictive modeling for them, these are the things that break out as the most at risk, okay? And then the other thing you're looking at is whether or not they completed the survey or they did not complete the survey. So for each one of those different risk factors, we have that broken into whether or not they completed the survey. And then the blue is the retention rate difference for those different groups. So let's actually, I'm going to come back to this, but let's look at FTF 0 first. So when we look at your survey and we pull in this information, students who have FTF 0, no transfer credits, those that completed the survey, and what that means is they completed your survey and then the practitioners had the information, and so they did interventions with those students. They were connected to the students. The students who completed the survey and had that engagement, the retention rate is 93%. Students who did not complete the survey is at 62%. So that's an incredible difference. And the reason I want to look at this by FTF 0 is because this is an at-risk population. We can't say, well, these were students that we expected to be really successful anyway. No, this is a really high at-risk population. Let's look at one other one. This is high school GPA. This one's super important because so many schools did away with the ACT requirements over the last couple of months. And so looking at this risk factor, if you have students who had a GPA of below 3.23, if they completed the survey and we did interventions with them, 100% of them came back. If they did not complete the survey and we weren't able to do interventions with them, then it was only at 50%. So this speaks really to, in each of these high at-risk categories, if we can understand what's going on with students, we can engage with them and we can really make a difference in terms of what those retention rates look like ultimately for those at-risk populations. I want to show you something else. I really love this because this represents so much work from our practitioners since March. So right here, we're looking at within Pharos 360 interventions. So what that means is these are all students who were engaged in some way. They either had a phone call to them, they had an early alert put in on them, they did tutoring, they worked with the writing lab. Every student that's on this chart had some engagement, right? But here, those that completed the survey, their retention rate was 98.55, and those that did not complete the survey, their retention rate was 87.7. So this speaks to a couple of things. These are people who were connected, but having done that survey means that you are able to target your conversations in those connected relationships to address the issues that really need to be addressed. So once I understand this student is not feeling connected, they don't have a sense of belonging, when I do my phone call, I can have conversations around that specific issue instead of this, which is just, we're just gonna have conversations about things that we might guess you would be feeling. It's really powerful data to be able to see how identifying and then connecting and solving those problems helps move them through. A couple more I wanna show you here. This is all students who had contact. So not just administrative stuff, but these people actually had meetings. They had either a referral come in, they had, sorry, that's not true. These are people who had some log entry. So they had a referral come in, they were collecting information using student updates, they had some contact. Again, those that completed the survey, those that did not complete the survey. So having that information so that you are targeting your conversation is why connect is before solve. Because sometimes there's nothing we can do to solve the fact that they feel overwhelmed or they don't feel like they're doing really well academically. But if we have that connection, we can have conversation about that. And even if ultimately we're not like, oh, check that off, that's not a problem anymore, we've created space for them to be able to make sense of it and change their perception of that as well. Okay, one more I want to show you. This is what I was getting very excited about. This is contact type. So these are all students who actually had some contact with somebody, not just an administrative task, but actually they had correspondence or they talked to somebody or they had a meeting or something like that. Again, those that completed the survey, you can see the difference in retention rates versus those that had the same engagement, but we did not have what we needed to be able to target our conversation to make sure that we're talking about the kinds of things that you've listed here. I might be doing academic advising for someone, or I might be checking in because I'm Res Life. If I know that this student is really struggling in their courses, that's gonna then help give structure to the kind of conversation that I have with that student versus somebody who is really stressed about financial means. And then that is gonna be the thing that I'm gonna try to, talk about with them there. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions. Perfect. So I think our next normal, which you and I have talked about this, you've taught me this language, our next normal, I really like, because where we are right now, I would not like for this to be the new normal. I would like for us to get another normal.
and we likely will, and we'll likely have another normal and another normal. So rather than assume that there's a done point and it maybe is something you don't like, our next normal.
Exactly right. And yeah. I think framing that for our students, helping them understand that. And also, I'm really interested in this idea that you're teaching them to have self-agency, to ask for help, to tell the truth about what's going on with them, and that the outcome of that is that then they get what they need. I like people who ask for what they need, who say, this is what's happening with me, because it makes it so much easier for us to be able to kind of go in and use those tricks and tips to kind of guide what's the next thing that's going to happen with them.
You know, Rachel, I hadn't thought about it, but when we were designing some of these, we actually ran it. We have the learning science team has a student panel, and we ran these survey questions by the student panel. And one of the things that we didn't ask, but that came out, was the student panel said that not only did we ask the right questions and in the right way, but it caused them to think about and reflect upon their experience. Yeah. So you're getting them to think and have agency and showing them the value of that.
Absolutely. I really like that. You know, when we did that the impact survey, that was part of what we were thinking, is we want to say to students, hey, you need to think about who are going to be resources for you. You need to think about how you're going to manage these things that are coming up, both so that they would process that in their own head, but then also so that we would know how to kind of apply those resources. Yeah. So I love that. Okay, I want to talk about our resources. Let me say before I move on to that, there is my encouragement in this process is that we are ahead of the curve right now. It's not that we've sent them home for Thanksgiving already. It's that we still have them in some way. And we do have time to connect with them if they're on our campus. We do have time to incentivize and get them to take these surveys now that we see how important it is. And what we're seeing in the data is that that process of asking them and then resourcing them is making a huge difference in terms of student success and retention. We have a lot of clients who are at their average retention again for fall, which is amazing in light of everything that's happened. Yeah. And they're able to say to people on campus, here's all of the work we did in order to deliver this student success and retention rate. And I think, you know, we've been telling our clients, I know you've been saying the same thing,
Yeah.
Being able to show the work that you do is going to be really, really important in the coming months, so that people understand how you landed where you did, you know, and how much it took for you to be able to get there.
Yeah.
Sherry, I have one question here about the survey. In terms of IRB approval, do you have a lot of times to go through kind of the survey committee to get these surveys approved? Are they customizable? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, a couple things. I think you really want to connect with whoever's chair of your IRB, because it varies dramatically from campus to campus, unfortunately. In some campuses, these are considered educational exercises that we're just using to support students. So it's like a form, it's like a thing, and you don't have to go through IRB. In other situations, you do. The questions are pretty straightforward, but it is not anonymous, and that's going to raise some questions. But there's no way to do support for students and help them except to do it in a non-anonymous way. So there's no question about that. In terms of whether there's research done, I only do it at the sort of aggregate level, and that's typically built into our contracts. And I never actually interact with a student. So I'm doing records research, and so it's a little bit different. And I never do anything that's single campus. So I do everything that's much more global. Unless it's at the campus request and I'm working collaboratively with them, and that's a different scenario. So kind of like you guys, you know?
Yeah. So let's talk about resources, because I think the reason we're here is because we want to make sure that we're setting up a plan for you to be able to be successful coming in the next couple of months. Can you talk to us about iClicker Insights?
Yeah, iClicker Insights is the brand name for those surveys and that set of surveys. And Mandy is on the call, and she may be able to turn on video and wave. And so what we've done, there's Mandy. And Mandy and I work together a lot. If you want to schedule a consultation, that's truly just a conversation with Mandy and I about what we're doing and how we're doing it and whether or not it would fit and how it works, and she can demo it and everything. What I love about this, I don't know if Mandy loves it, but I love the fact that the price point is so reasonable that it makes sense. So, you know, yes, it's 5 clicks to set up a survey, but you can do as many as you want, and you can do them quickly, and you can do them to whom you want at a price that makes this a pretty easy decision for many campuses.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's a no-brainer, honestly. I just think for you to be able to have that insight so quickly is going to be incredibly helpful to schools.
And to check in with the students when you need to, when you want to. I did throw some other resources up here. Here's the website if you want to go look. The full Mizzou case study, so you can read about how they did what they did, and as well as the outcomes. There's the video for University of Houston. There's another case study from University of Tennessee, Martin. And then we did a webinar based on some of the bigger surveys that we've done, but some of these same kinds of questions. And this was done by Matthew Venice, a research manager on my team. And that's the link to the recording, so you can watch it anytime.
That's going to be great. I know all of those will be super helpful to schools. I also would say, remember, we're talking about this partnership. So if we are getting that data and you need to pull it in so that the right people can see it and they can do those interventions and we can do that measurement. Love to talk to you about this. I know many of you are joining us for our Mission First series. I have another one with Anthony Melchiori. He's our partner in that, and he's doing that with me on Monday. It's always very exciting.
Yes.
He's a lot of fun to work with. We are continuing to talk about this idea of kind of our relationship status. We were talking about how we're kind of moving into a long distance relationship with our students now. So it's a little bit complicated, and we've got to be really intentional about how we're managing that. Also, you guys, a lot of our students are struggling. They're going to continue to struggle, and we've worked with Anna to create some videos that are free for you to send to your students that talk about things like time management and motivation, being resourceful. These would be great interventions for some of those survey answers, right? To be able to say, hey, we want you to watch this because we know that this is something that you're really struggling with. And then Pharos has worked really hard for our clients to create lots of tools in the middle of COVID. We have the luxury of not being on a campus and having students in front of us all of the time. So we have capacity to be thinking about, oh my goodness, November is coming. Here's what we need to do. We've got to get ahead of that. And so since March, we've been working really, really hard to provide resources not only to think about what's happening on your campus, but also, like I said, if you do not have software that is helping you manage this process, we're always talking with our clients and other schools about, you've got to get efficient. There's no time right now to be inefficient with the things that you are doing, because we are tired and we don't have capacity for things to be hard and to take too much time. So I would love to talk to any of you about that. I know Sherry would love to talk more about the survey piece. Let me make sure that I didn't miss any questions. I think Rachel Elam is sending all of those links in the chat. So if you will find those helpful, then please use them. It is almost Thanksgiving, Sherry.
I know.
Well, that is something that we can really look forward to. I have said to all of our higher education friends, you must be disciplined in this Thanksgiving break of taking time and resting, because I know we have not stopped working. We did not have a summer break. We worked super hard all summer to make sure that we were going to get our students back. And so I think being disciplined about that for us in that break is going to be incredibly important for us to be able to come back and keep running this race, however long it lasts.
In our new normal.
In our new normal. Friends, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure. If there's anything we can do, or if there are any resources you need that you feel like we can be helpful to you, please reach out and let us know. It's always a pleasure to serve you. And we hope to connect with you later. Thanks, Sherry.
Thanks, Rachel. That was fun.
Yeah.